everybody. Welcome to our presentation of investing, impact, and community investing. It's my pleasure to welcome our speakers this morning. Tom Abood in the green shirt is a champion of all things green and sustainable, and he's the chair of the Endowment Fund Committee at the First Universalist Church, and a mover and shaker for many issues related to sustainability and environmental justice. Tom divested from Wall Street years ago and has aligned his investments with values of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, which he calls JEDI. And he's been choosing people and planet over profit. So welcome, Tom. In the middle, we have Craig Jonas. He's a lifelong entrepreneur with a history of success in business, academics, and athletics. Craig is the founder and CEO of CoPeace, a company creating inclusive, socially impactful wealth for all people with the intention to grow your money for good. He has over 30 years of management experience with a passion for team building and drawing individuals with big ideas together. He's a member of First Plymouth Church and the son of Reverend Dan and Helen Jonas, also First Plymouth members. And then we have a bonus this morning. A surprise speaker has joined us, and this is Hanan Levine. He's the Chief Investment Officer of CoPeace. Hanan has served as a Director of Capital Markets at Bank of the West, overseeing and managing the business development of capital markets and fixed income investment throughout the Rocky Mountain and Midwest regions. Hanan received his master's degree from the University of Northern Carolina's Kenan-Flagler Business School, Kenan-Flagler, an undergraduate degree in economics from Yale University. Hanan competed on the Yale swim team and also competed internationally for the Israeli national swimming team. So welcome to all of you. We'll start this morning with Tom's presentation. Each speaker, actually, there'll be two presentations. Craig and Hanan are going to do theirs together for about 20 minutes each, and then hopefully we'll have about 10-15 minutes at the end for some questions. So thank you.
Pam. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, neighbors, for inviting me to speak. Since I go to First Universalist Church right across the road. So we could get to the PowerPoint, Russ. We'll get rolling there. But before that shows up, you know, I was asked to become kind of the head of our endowment committee and our endowment fund at First Universalist Church, because there were a number of people who thought we really need to take a closer look at our fund and where is that fund invested? And is that fund invested in alignment with our principles and our values and the mission of our church? And everybody knew that I am somewhat of a radical in terms of where I put my money, and you know, and I wanted to go basically, actually go to the first slide, Russ. Keep going back. Okay, let's go to the second slide here. And so this really is more of a story about a life journey as opposed to just investing, and how I got to the place I am basically, and where we want to be going with our endowment fund, and really an educational process. But when I had never invested in Wall Street or any type of investment before I came to Denver from Nebraska, went to University of Denver Law School. Once I had a little bit of money, you know, I was playing basketball with a stockbroker and said, oh yeah, let's invest in Wall Street, and had no clue what I was getting into, what he was getting me into. It was all then about following the herd mentality of making money with your money, and really don't be concerned about how you're making money with your money. So that, you know, that worked for a little while, but then I started looking and reading about aligning my investments with my values, started reading some great books about that, and as a result, really divested out of just, I actually fired him, moved on to another investment advisor that was all about socially responsible investments. And we did a lot of research there, and I felt really comfortable. So basically started investing in socially responsible SRI funds, which were all part of Wall Street. And I was feeling good for a while, and then really started digging deep into those funds and what are they invested in. And Craig and I share the same philosophy there. You're going to see the same major corporations in almost all the mutual funds out there. And I had no desire to do business or to be an investor in the Walmarts of the world, the McDonald's, the Pepsis, the fossil fuel industry. And so we really took a serious look, and I started creating my own mutual funds. I was really into this back then. It was probably in the 90s. And there was a company called Folio where you could actually create your own companies, and did a lot of research on various companies and created my own mutual fund. So I really talk about super SRI. Now I could control what funds I really was invested in. And so, yeah, well, this seems pretty good. But then I started doing a really diving deeper into Wall Street. And what does that mean to be invested in Wall Street? And so started reading lots of books, started recognizing that a lot of our problems, global warming, climate change, the vast disparity of wealth and income, were all driven by really the Wall Street model of maximizing shareholder return at all costs, not looking at all the externalities and really what is the impact of those investments. And then on top of that, basically, if you look at investing in Wall Street, 99% of the money you put into that is really about trading and speculation. It is really not creating a real positive impact in terms of new jobs, in terms of affordable housing, small minority business loans. So I really started taking a look at how do I really align, my money with my values, and it really boiled down to the recognition that everything we do is an investment. Everything we do has impact. It's either positive or negative. And so I really started looking at my whole lifestyle. How do I live? How to align my life with the triple bottom line impact of everything that I do? How does that align with a positive impact for people, planet, and profits? I usually put at the bottom of the list. And so as a result of that, divested completely out of Wall Street. And it was not an easy task, because if you're invested in Wall Street, you're using a financial advisor, you're into all kinds of different things, diversity, all these different kind of investments. Then you have to take a look at capital gains. But I did a tremendous amount of research about where I wanted to be going before we divested. And then also the other part here is, from my perspective, everything is interconnected, and everyone is interconnected and interdependent. And so that was a big factor of how I want my investments, what I want my investments to look like as well. So it was really kind of a life journey, which recognized that everything I do is an investment. How I drove here today, where do I buy my products, the food I eat, the farmers I support, just everything we do really has an impact. So how can I align my entire life as an investment with doing good instead of doing harm? Next slide, please.
Maybe.
All right. So So I really did gravitate towards impact and community investing, became an angel investor, had no clue what an angel investor was, learned quickly, certainly lost some money being an angel investor, but also started looking more about community investing. And what community investing is not is really Wall Street, any publicly traded kind of companies. And it's not SRI. I learned that through my own portfolio. And it's really not ESG investing. And Craig and Hanan are going to talk a lot more about ESG. But really what SRI, what these kind of concepts are is to avoid the really bad companies. But it's not focusing on direct investments in organizations and companies that are making a significant impact to their community, to the world, and that's what I wanted to do with my funds. So next, please. So community investing, it is all about investing in communities that are underserved. And what I found out through my research is that, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, women, rural communities, they're basically disenfranchised. The main Wall Street banks do not loan to these communities. And so they do not have the flow of capital that so many of us enjoy, and which is so critical to building generational wealth, to buying a home, to getting your business off the ground, getting to that next level. So we're really looking at communities that are shut out from mainstream, and who is going to help them? The lending, the financial situation, and really the financial institutions are not geared to loaning to these communities. They do not have the contacts, the relationships, and quite frankly, they don't make nearly the money that they would make by doing the big deals. And so you're not seeing the money flow to where it needs to flow. But it's really all about supporting these communities, because when you look at it, the small businesses are really the lifeline and what make this country and so many countries great. What happened to the middle class? What happened to the small businesses out there? They're just not getting the finances and the service that they need. So the primary focus is community, and it's really a long-term relationship. And that's what I found through my investing is it's really about relationships. What is my money doing? Who am I dealing with on terms of my money being invested? And what is the relationship there? One thing I'll spend a few minutes about is Community Development Financial Institutions, CDFIs. And there's a resource, I'll go over some resources. Some of these materials come out of the Beyond Wall Street Community Investing presentation that we did on August 26th through First Universalist. And we put together some incredible resources that you all will have available. And CDFIs, there's a list of CDFIs that was put together by the Social Venture Network, actually Social Venture Circle now, it's kind of changed names, but CDFIs are kind of the lifeline to these underserved communities. There are over 1,200 certified CDFIs in the United States. And a CDFI is actually certified by the Community Development Financial Institution Fund, which is part of our U.S. Department of Treasury. And these CDFIs have been around since the 1970s, and they were created to really bridge this gap because underserved communities were not getting the financial resources that they needed, and it was really impairing the economic development of them. So CDFIs have become, when I was divesting, it's been about 11 years since I divested out of Wall Street. And when I was looking around for where do I put my money, CDFIs kept coming up, but At that time, there were very few of them that would accept small investor investments. You'd either have to have 250,000, 500,000, or they didn't accept any investments. They were dealing mostly with grants from major institutions. But now, in this resource that you will be made available, it's a list of all the CDFIs in the United States that will accept individual investments. And you don't have to be what's called an accredited investor to invest in a lot of these. And when I say accredited investor, the definition is basically you have to have $1 million net worth exclusive of your home, you and your spouse, in order to be an accredited investor. So once again, the game is skewed to really those wealthy people to invest in a lot of resources out there, a lot of potential opportunities, especially when you start looking at investing locally. Almost all requirements are you need to be an accredited investor to get involved with a lot of companies, even right next door to where you live, which is, to me, has always been pretty ridiculous. So CDFIs have been really coming on in the last few years, and I'll speak about a few of them here in a minute, but it's a resource that makes it available for individual investors to become community investors and mitigate the risk factors. When you're an angel investor and you're investing directly in that company, you don't have a whole lot of risk mitigation if, basically you put the money in there and they don't succeed. With CDFIs, there's a little more of a layer of insulation and risk mitigation. And historically, what I have seen and what most of the reports show is that the default rate for their loans, the CDFI loans to their community members, is better than most major banks. And their repayment, the CDFI repayment to investors, is almost across the board but 100%. And the reason that is because, once again, it's relationship lending. These CDFIs are all part of their community. They are people in the community, they know the community, and they're lending basically to people they know. And so there's a trust factor there and a character factor that just can't be reproduced when you go into a bank and you don't know anybody if the lending officer comes over. On top of that, on top of the relationship factor, is it's not just money that they're providing, they're also providing technical and business support, which is huge. I actually formed a slow money investment group. Slow Money was one of the organizations, nonprofits that I really aligned with once I divested out of Wall Street. And that's all about bringing your money down to earth and investing within a 50-mile radius in farms and farmers. And we put an investment group together and we did that. We made loans, developed community and relationships. But what we found is a lot of these farmers and food producers needed much more than just capital. Yeah. You can't just give capital and expect success. In fact, a lot of times when you do the business mentoring, you find out they don't need capital. They really shouldn't be in a position to borrow money or bring in investors. So next slide, please. So what is CI looking at? These are the sectors here, which if they don't resonate with you, then, well, we're all in the wrong place here. This is really what it's all about. This is what our money should be doing, is creating affordable housing, is creating loans for BIPOC communities and small businesses and women, and sustainable agriculture, all these things that go into health, education, all these things that really create healthy, vibrant communities. And we're really at a crisis point now because our communities need so much and they're getting so little from Main Street. So these are the sectors that we're really looking at. Next, please. when we did our presentation on the 26th, we actually had these 3 co-presenters that were awesome. So that's why I'd really encourage you to listen to the video recording of this. Root Capital is all about creating wealth for indigenous farmers in Central America and Africa, and it's primarily around coffee. But they are bringing together, and what's incredible is so much of this story for indigenous farmers are around women. It's the women that are driving the change and really the regenerative aspects of what's going on. So they are really doing some great work in those countries, creating cooperatives and making it so that these people can have a living. You know, they don't need a lot of money, but they need the capital in order to keep moving and growing. Owista Corporation is an incredible corporation. It's actually located in Longmont, Colorado. And I've been an investor. I've been an investor in all of these. I'll make full disclosure there. Since getting out of Wall Street, it's like, wow, this looks like a no-brainer for it. And we'll talk about kind of how they structure their investments. But Owista is a Native American CDFI intermediary. And what they do is they get the money that comes into their accounts through investors, through grants, and then they loan the money to other Native American CDFIs. So they're not loaning directly to the natives on the reservations or in Native American communities, but they are basically lending to the Native American CDFIs in those communities. So it's kind of another layer of, from an investor protection, mitigation of risk, while you're dealing with an intermediary CDFI who's also dealing with CDFIs, and they all have incredible track records for repayment. So it makes you feel pretty good as an investor. But I have to tell you, I've been doing a lot more Zoom, I've been on Zoom presentations with Native American CDFIs, and what is going on in that. The whole Native American culture is just incredible to watch. And once again, it's being driven and led by women. And they are so strong and they are committed to overcoming the colonization and the oppression that has been dominated them since this was colonized. And we have from my perspective, we have a moral and ethical obligation to look at our Native American brothers and sisters and see how can we help them because of all the oppression that they've been through. C-Note is a for-profit company that's only been around for about 3-4 years. And it's a really novel concept. It's actually woman founded and owned. I'm an investor in C-Note as an equity investor. They basically are an alternative for us investors to put, instead of putting our money into a savings account, we can put our money in C-Note and they will loan that money to CDFIs. And they have a number of CDFIs that they've vetted. And so they are loaning the money that we loan to C-Note to these CDFIs. They will pay, C-Note pays 2.5% interest, which is really a good interest rate out there if you've looked at CDs and other these type of investments. And so, and you can access, I think it's a 3-year commitment to put your money, but you can access a portion of that every quarter. So it does provide some liquidity. And once again, it's another alternative to democratizing the flow of capital and getting it where it needs to go. Next slide. These are the resources. We talked a little bit about the CDFI loan funds that accept individual investments. Make sure you get that. Pam's got it, Rush have it. And I'm sure if they don't have it for whatever reason, feel free to email me and I'll send all this stuff to you. This Passstone report was a really interesting report by a financial advisor company that looked at regenerative agriculture they were getting so many of their clients that wanted to invest in regenerative ag, especially local. And so they did this great report that has some good ideas about investing. That is one of my passions, is regenerative agriculture, local food, taking back our food system from corporate industrial ag. And this is what we have to do. We have to support those that are in the front lines that are going to recreate the systems that we used to have before they got dismantled. You know, it's just horrific that you can't raise chickens and cattle and get them slaughtered close to you at a reasonable price, because the production facilities, the slaughterhouses have all been consolidated, and there's just no place for a lot of these small farmers to turn economically. This rural distress arising from the concentration of financial and economic power, it's a great testimony that was done earlier this year, and that is showing the impact to rural communities as well as urban communities and small businesses, because the financial sectors are consolidating and they're getting bigger and bigger, and they don't care about the small people. They don't care about small businesses, small farmers. So this is really critical for us as citizens to really start moving our money around to help people. The last resource list is what I put together, and that will show you some other options besides CDFIs, some great reading materials that I encountered along the way, and just an overall kind of game plan that people can start implementing. Next, please. So what do these investments look like? This is kind of a typical term sheet. It's not an equity play. You're not becoming an owner of those organizations when you're talking about community investments. Almost all of them follow this loan formula. So you're going to loan the organization money. They're going to give you a promissory note, and then it's a wide range, but usually from 0 to 3% is the interest, and the term 1 to 10 years. The longer term, the better interest rate they're willing to give you. Interest is usually paid annually, and then the whole note is paid off whenever that term is in. And it's really a simple approach. And a lot of them say, you can, as an investor, you can choose a lower interest rate if you want, which I love that concept, because when you think about it, what's going on here is we're loaning them money and they're loaning it out. So we have to keep those interest rates affordable. We have to, as investors, we have to get away from the Market Street mentality, rates of returns. We have to start looking at rates of return that are regenerative, that are basically for people, planet, and profits. But what is it going to take to regenerate our ecosystem, this incredible web of all existence that we're a part of, and to make these communities healthy and whole? Because until we're all thriving and healthy, we're defeating the purpose. And it's very critical. Next slide. So this is my closing slide, just a few little quotes here, but the middle quote came from one of the OISTA conferences that I attended, and it was a Native American conference on reconvening capital. And relationships are so important to the Native Americans, and I so much resonate with their worldview that everything is interconnected and interdependent, that we are all our relatives. But remember who we are, our relationships to one another, to our land, and to all beings. Strength comes from our relationships, builds communities, and takes care of everyone. Wealth is defined by how well you take care of those around you, which is so true. And then I really recommend The Soul of Money by Lynn Twist. That was one of the books I read early on. And once again, this makes all the sense, because we have such a bizarre relationship with our money for the most part. It's hard to talk about that. People are really hesitant to talk about where their money is, what it's doing. And a lot of people want to disconnect from their money once they've made it and they've given it over to a financial advisor. We have to take responsibility. We have to know what it's doing. And I agree that money is like water. It really needs to flow to create healthy ecosystems downstream. Once that's dammed, once it's diverted, then we're losing those healthy communities. And so it can be a conduit for commitment, a currency of love. Money moving in the direction of our highest commitments nourishes our world and ourselves. If we use it with integrity, then it carries integrity forward. Know the flow. Take responsibility for the way your money moves in the world. Let your soul inform your money, and your money express your soul. With that, namaste. And if anyone has a question, well, we'll take questions later, but anytime you have questions, feel free to reach out to me.
So, Tom, I think a lot of what Tom presented is going to be very consistent with what we presented. So we'll accelerate some of the foundational things. I wanted to thank Pam and Rush for setting this up, and my mom and dad for probably making sure everybody knew about companies of peace, co-peace. I think we have a very complimentary presentation in that we agree with almost everything Tom said. We would take it one more step where we try to take that direct investment and actually try to provide competitive returns, because from our perspective, adding that to the community investment is also an important part of it, so that we can create a sustainable ecosystem that actually does what Tom is saying, plus adds the competitive returns. It sounds like an idealistic idea, but it ends up being a good business decision to care about the long-term future of our world. So that's kind of the good news. So Companies of Peace, co-peace, you can start it up if you want. It is a holding company. So the idea was relatively straightforward, and we thought not that novel when we created it. We took the kind of the Berkshire Hathaway approach and applied the holding company to investing directly in companies that are doing real change. So our first investment, for example, was in a company that was a Black woman-run business out of Harlem, New York, that is taking cloud storage, 5G, to communities that don't have access to the grid. So one of the communities that we're helping get their capabilities to is actually a Native American community in Wyoming. So Mom's got a medallion at that community to actually create it, which is very, very cool. So you gave me goosebumps on several of your combinations. Yeah, back.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, very excited to have Hanan with me today. So we'll zip through this and then open it up for question and answers. I agree with what Tom said, that people didn't know, and you're right. They said, we'll just kind of disassociate our money with our values. And I think a lot of it, from our perspective, capitalism has responsibility. The same thing Tom said, that to make the world a better place and to be responsible. When Milton Friedman said, hey, no, it's all about shareholder value, that caused a lot of danger in our world, and a lot of pollution, and a lot of dirt, and a lot of things that are very difficult for us to recover from right now. The clock is ticking. I mean, we are in a very short time where we have to make some changes. So I think, what Tom's suggesting plus what co-peace is suggesting is trying to address that clicking clock in a very progressive way. I'll turn it over to you for the next slide, Anand.
Yeah, really, as I'm hearing both Tom and Craig speak, it's really that word values, right? We've really changed our attitude to what that word means. The word value doesn't mean I don't care about money anymore. My daughter's going to college next year. It's a private college. They're going to accept good feelings as tuition, right? We still care, unfortunately, we still care about money, but it's also adding to it the rest of my values, the equality value, the environmental value, and really looking at all those and looking at our investment, presenting a value or increasing the value in every one of those aspects without sacrificing one to get the other. So that's what CoPiece is built on, is taking and making sure that the companies that we're investing in are financially viable, and they do create financial value to the market and to its investors. Because I always give this example: if a Coke can is very environmentally friendly, but it costs $50 versus a Coke can that is not, that costs 50 cents. Whether people want to be able to buy the Coke can, they can't from a financial perspective. So we created a financially not viable investment or financially not viable company. So really the idea here is to create a combination that the company is financially viable, it's got a great solution from an economical standpoint, and it creates an impact on the community. So that way, that both of those things actually increase its value. As we're seeing, people are voting with their money. People are buying, especially the younger generation.
Yep.
If you look at the clothing, it's very easy. They're going after the companies that have, better conditions as far as environmental and employment conditions. If you see something bad in the news, the stock reacts in a negative way because the market believes that ESG is not a trend. It's not something that's just like a fad. It's here to stay, and it's important for the future value creation of the company.
Yep. Yeah. And we argue that it's not inconsistent to be able to align your values with your money. And I think Tom's right on when he's saying that everything you do has influence. There's a lot of different terminology that kind of thrown around, and ESG honestly doesn't quite fit us either. It's more of an ESG driven kind of metric that helps, but it's one that people are talking about a lot, and we've been getting some press on. So we've been harnessing that ESG, but we really take it to one more level. We're trying to be impact investors, where we take our money and grow your money for good. So it's a different level from our perspective. And being in a community of faith, and I think it's an important place for companies of peace, CoPiece, to be, is that Jesus taught us to love everybody, and we mean everybody as well as or First Plymouth mean everybody. So we're trying to find ways that these communities that haven't had access to the game provide a new way to get in. So we've got some democratization tools and that we're working on as well. I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah.
We can go.
So I agree with that. With ESG investing, what we've done is we looked at the environment and the map and said, okay, what does ESG investing mean to CoPiece? And really that's what we focused on, creating that. And it's impact investing, and investing in companies that decide to change the way the world behaves. They're moving the status quo. They're not doing less bad, like Tom said. I saw on one of your slides. I thought that was great.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the investments, especially in the current companies and a lot of the mutual funds, focus on investments that do less, companies that do less bad.
Yeah.
Instead of companies that do good. And the difference there is not I'm using less pollutant areas or less pollutant chemicals in my production. It's I found a new way to produce this that doesn't have those chemicals. Like that will be the difference of the companies that CoPiece is investing in versus kind of the ESG in general investment. It really is the intersection of all those areas in the investment world. It's traditional investment. We find ways to invest through equity participation, through debt, like Tom mentioned. Philanthropy has that aspect of feel good and give it back to the community. And then the liquid and alternative investment like hedge funds or private equity funds, but taking all those thematic themes in Wall Street, themes in the current capital market, and focusing them toward companies that are doing better, not they're finding a way to shift the environment to do better.
Yeah. Thanks, Raj.
Sorry.
Oh yeah.
We're trying to get through it.
Oh yeah. And Jim just put this new one together, so we're it's all good. So I use the example. I usually pick on my parents as not having any didn't know about the mutual funds, and when the CNN had a show on for-profit prisons, Kamal Bell went around and was like, hey, it was really revealing. It was a very interesting show. And then somebody suggested that he should meet with his financial advisor and see what he's invested in. And he's like, oh, so he meets with his financial advisor, and she opens up his portfolio, and she said, do you see this mutual fund you're part of? 20% oil and gas, 10% for-profit prisons, 10% firearms, 10% tobacco. And he was like, no. And the same thing Tom discovered is like everybody was doing it. Nobody knew that they were doing it. So it wasn't there was not the knowledge, but I think young people and women and people who are creating this change have access to information now that we didn't have when we were younger. And I think part of when I was doing responsible investing, I was willing to kind of give a few points, but if we can figure out a system that allows you to continue to have a competitive return and make the world a better place, I think that's also a good part of the equation. You can go next. You can go quick on this.
Yeah, this is just different about environmental social governance, and really just to simplify it to everybody. If it feels right, it's impact investing. If it doesn't feel right, it's not. That's the way, obviously very simplification, but we have a company that's taking and bringing infrastructure of 5G, Wi-Fi, electricity, and water to communities that don't have it, right? So is a child that during the pandemic didn't have Wi-Fi and couldn't go to school can now have Wi-Fi and go to school? Like, if that's not impact, that's easy to see that that's community impact.
Yeah.
Right. So usually impact investing is very easy to see and simple and not something that you have to like dive into. Just to follow up on the example, when you look at those mutual funds, the way those companies enter those mutual funds, they have what they call shareholder advocacy, where ExxonMobil has shareholder advocacy. They listen to their shareholders. They give them an opportunity to speak. They have some money that they put into a certain thing, and then they fall into the kind of ESG mutual funds. Now, it's better than them doing nothing. I think we can all agree that there's place and room for that, and I think all these companies are identifying that. But also, what we're trying to do is differentiate and show you the different types of investment and different levels of impact in the market that where they're at.
Yeah, so we are publicly we are a public benefit corporation. So when we talk about the shareholder value, and most of the companies that Tom divested himself from Wall Street were corporations that didn't have any protections built in. There's new legal structures that allow companies like us to be actually in our bylaws and in our articles of incorporation protecting our stakeholder community over just our shareholder value. So that is an important move. And we're so close to it, we think that people know this, but it's a relatively new legal structure that COPIS was able to take advantage of. And we are also a certified B Corp, which is maybe a little bit along the lines of kind of more ESG and less impact, but at least it shows it's a very strenuous process, and it tells you you're kind of the stamp of approval that you're walking the walk and you're doing what you say you're going to do. Some of the well-known B Corps are like Patagonia, Ben and Jerry's, and companies like that probably are doing less bad, but are on the spectrum of activity that at least are trying to make things a little bit better. We can go to the next one.
Yeah, ESG has grown. This goes back to the whole idea of a trend or a theme versus a movement. We're seeing it in the stock exchange, basically implementing the need for diversity boards. We're seeing the money flowing toward companies from both the financial aspect and the investment aspect of growth and assets with ESG. It's no longer a trend. When the big banks, when you see them adopting something, or the big Wall Street, when they're starting to adopt something, they're not adopting it out of the kindness of their heart. They're adopting it to make money. And if you go to every large bank or every large one of those companies, they're talking about ESG, they're talking what they're doing good, and they have a certain method. And the reason why they're talking is to attract the market, because that's where the market is going. So again, I'm not knocking down anybody. I think it's a wonderful progression toward it. And it's only better. The more money we have flowing into it, the faster the change that we have toward it.
And the same, we can go to the next one. The same thing is that it has to be real. I mean, the young people with the access to information are making sure your board has at least 50% women, or at least some people of color in the representation, despite our lack of diversity up here with the all bald guys. It is an important part of where things are going. But I guess in some ways this is where it came from in kind of a negative way. But hopefully we're part of the change that we're wanting to see. You go to the next one.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think we're just about there. So we one of the things Pam asked us to talk about is what are what we want the audience to hear, and one of the things I think we want, our number one message is that just as Tom said, and as Anand said, you can be consistent with your values and your money. And I think that it's such an important piece for us to go forward, and something that really wasn't looked at, and people were shy about it. And people were like, oh, let's not talk about that. We don't even know what's going on there. But now that's changing. Definitely. So Amy's got a good Domini Impact Investments. You go to the next one. And we talked, Anand talked a little bit about this. You can go ahead. It's like the spectrum of things coming together.
Yeah, this is similar to what we talk about. That you can find impact now in every way that you want to contribute. So whether it be from grants, there's grants out there, there's philanthropy, there's out there, and there's impact investing that focuses on impact. Which again, I think that the main focus that we are trying to prevail is focusing on the companies that are doing it differently, not less bad. I think that if anything, one thing I wanted to share with you guys.
Yeah. And that's kind of consistent. The UN has suggested that we all follow the sustainable development goals. That's something that we use. There's a big movement in the impact investing where a lot of people are actually paralyzed a little bit because they can't, make all the clicks, fit. And for the co-piece perspective, like Anand pointed out, we've got companies that are doing the work. If you looked at it and you looked at it from the complete impact lens, there might be part of their sourcing that came in from a pipeline that we might have a problem with, but we're working on trying to help them get there. But they're providing true impact. So we use the tools that are out there, and then we add a narrative on it. So we say, okay, this is the story of those people that didn't have access to the internet in these communities, and now they do. We can go here.
Yeah. So really, the way you look at like impact investing for each person, right? It's finding what how you fit on each one of these dials, if you will. And each one of these dials have a different solution from investment. This is kind of a risk parameter that if you guys ever met with a financial consultant, they walk you through here is like, what's your financial return want, what's your liquidity need, what's your risk parameter, and what's your time frame. What we added to it is the impact that is also important to it. Now, the impact itself does not necessarily have to affect any one of those other dials. It's a standalone dial that you, with your own values, can decide and dial. And the dial is also not a straight dial. Some of us have different values and want to emphasize different values. Whether it be diversity, whether it be the environment, you can find ways to find investments that match your specific values or match a variety of impact values. So there's a lot of stuff out there that doesn't sacrifice the return.
So one of the other things that Pam asked is for us to blend in a kind of a spiritual practice. And I think one of the quotes that come to mind, kind of to follow up on some of Tom's quotes, is that Mother Teresa said, "I cannot change the world alone, but I can cast a stone across the water to create many ripples." So I think that's something that we're trying to express here today, and really appreciate everybody's time and appreciate being here. And let's open it up. Yep.
Question time. Can I do right the chat? Will you do that?
Sure. If anybody at home wants to put something in the chat, do we have any questions from the audience here?
Actually. Okay, so I'm a trustee on UCC related endowment. It's the Rocky Mountain Conference endowment, so it's not the First Plymouth endowment. And one of the things that as trustees we are told that we have to do is we have to be good fiduciaries, right?
Right.
And up until now, impact investing is kind of the avenue that you are automatically thrown down. But I'm hearing that First Plymouth is finding, or not First Plymouth, but First Universalist, your endowment, are you finding a way to invest in these CDFIs? I mean, how do you balance for an organization when it's not your money? this kind of more community-based investing? Yeah, that's my
Yeah,
question.
okay. And I'll kind of repeat, the question is if you're on an endowment committee or a trustee of a fund, and basically you are charged with fiduciary obligations, then, you know, what gives you authority to invest in these type of investments, CDFIs, impact investments? My response to that is at first we are changing the policy of our endowment fund, where it used to say, you know, the committee members are charged with maximizing returns, preserving principal, and it even had kind of where you needed to put it. We have now changed, we have a policy pending to be voted on by the board about the fund exists not only for expenditures to be aligned with our mission and values and principles, but also how we invest the fund. And we've actually listed some pretty interesting stuff about the investments we'll consider our relationship to the interdependent web of all existence, which we are a part, which is one of our principles, and actually lay it out about, you know, supporting Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. So now whoever's on this committee has some pretty good latitude about where to put the money. We still have preservation of principle, but we don't have maximizing financial return. Gives you a lot more flexibility.
I think that's important. So we've been approached also by endowments. We just started a project with Cornell. I've heard of that. I know Yale's, and Harvard just got a lot of publicity about divesting. So I think there's a way to kind of blend it both. I mean, it'd be interesting to look at the endowment and see what's in there right now and see what, you know, our kind of financial model people would suggest as kind of a blend of some of the CDFIs plus some of the impact investing, some of the other things that we're trying to produce, because I think if we can show a competitive and maybe even better than a competitive return and add that to the CDFIs, then you've got a mix of much more alignment that we've not seen. And I think UCC and Universalists can be leaders in this, to be very honest. I think the opportunity exists to create a model that is not been utilized today.
And actually, really quickly, if you look at the endowments, and I won't go into too much, because so I went to Yale, that's why I pointed at it. And Robert Swanson, which ran the Yale endowment for a long time, just passed away about 6 months ago. Revolutionized the way endowments are created. So I recommend reading his book. It's really fascinating.
You give the name again.
Swanson. His last name Swanson.
Swanson.
Yeah, Yale endowment. Revolutionized the way, and what he did is he told us that the endowments need to have diversification of assets past your regular diversification of your stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, because of the length of time of the endowment and the way we want to look at it. So as my recommendation to you is, as you look at each of these categories, of each of these diversification categories, include in them impact themes. So for example, CDFIs are a debt instrument, basically. So they're similar to bonds. So when you're looking at your fixed income part of your portfolio, that's what you compare it to. You compare that return to your fixed income part of your portfolio, and you look at the risk and associated, and there's plenty of research to show that the returns and the risks are much lower. So instead of looking at the way, the real financial, we can have a financial advisor and the problems with that conversation for another 2 hours. But the way that the advice is currently correlated is, let me worry about diversification. I'll create a mutual fund, or I'll create a portfolio and I'll diversify for it. Yeah. So instead of that, if you actually dive deep into it, and that might be an answer for a certain specific category, but not across the board for your portfolio. So I'd recommend looking at each aspect of it and finding investments there.
So here's a question from Nancy. As I continue to divest, one of the questions I hear is, why not invest in fossil fuel companies if they are committed to transitioning to renewable energy? what they say and what they do may not be helpful to know.
Right.
Well, that's-
Well, but the big question is the if and how. How are they committed? Like, no fossil fuel company is excited about this renewable thing. They're doing it because that's where we're going again. And I think Nancy, the biggest thing is, look into the company and look what they're actually doing to do this. Like, if they're committed to it, that means that they're shutting down oil fields and opening up or investing the money to be better. So they're actively, basically, they're gonna say that they're gonna have to actively lose money, which has been an historical, it's been a thing, to transition, like Amazon has done. If you look at Amazon, just not that they're an ESG company, but from a financial perspective, an historical company that said to its shareholders that for 5 years, Jeff Bezos came out and every investor conference says, we're gonna lose money, we're gonna lose money, we're gonna lose money, because I'm building the infrastructure and logistical company of the future. That's what he did. So if they're saying, I'm building the energy company of the future, they also need to say, we're gonna lose money to do it, because we all know that our current infrastructure is built to support the fossil fuel environment.
And interestingly, Amazon is in a lot of those ETFs and mutual funds, which are way less bad, but still, are quite dirty. We're combating this PR spin that a lot of these companies are putting out there. That's more what we call greenwashing or impact washing. So that we are, we're actively trying to get some news out there that, hey, be careful with some of that messaging. Like Anand said, look under the cover. If it's 1% of some of their things, and they're truly not, capping their oil wells, then they're really not doing it.
Oh, right. Yeah, Nancy, I would, a lot of people invest in bad companies. And I think it was brought up before about shareholder advocacy is actually trying to get the company to move their policies. But historically, I kind of wonder about the real impact of shareholder advocacy. What I've been reading lately is, especially in the Zoom arena, they're really not paying much attention to shareholders bringing petitions up and stuff. And I'd also, with fossil fuel companies, I'd look to see how complicit were they in hiding all of this from the public. And there's just so much bad history there that, to me, that would be not a good investment.
It hasn't been a good investment for a while. I mean, it hasn't actually provided a good return for a while, which kind of supports our argument in some ways.
I heard it, but I don't know if it's right or not, but that there was changes in the law recently that allow you to do more impact and less return on the dollar. I guess.
Yeah.
So and that protects companies like.
So people, we have investors that are both the credit and retail that we put out a crowdfunding campaign, so we allow everybody to participate in our growth. But yes, with these new changes in the law, that is an awareness that, this is not working. This capitalism where it's all about the shareholder value has not worked. So there's some evolution on that. I mean, it's slow. I mean,
So I guess my question is, so was it illegal for you to do what you were doing now?
They were, I wouldn't say it was illegal. It was protected by the shareholder value understanding that, well, we can do all this because all that matters is for us to grow the stock price, the shareholder value.
Fiduciary responsibility. Same fiduciary
So
responsibility.
you could do it, right? If you made money,
Right.
but
Exactly.
you couldn't do what you do now. Right?
We would argue, and I think Tom was supporting, is that if you include the multiple myriad bottom lines and just don't look at the one bottom line, you include pollution, include everything else, that would have still been a bad decision to invest in those companies.
Well,
And make
that makes perfect sense. I mean,
Yeah.
you add up all the cancer and everything else
Right.
that happens.
So the shareholder value,
The shareholder value is going up.
Well,
Even though you get $1,000 instead of 10,000, but you're healthier, the
Right.
world's better.
Values.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Okay, so you could do that in the past or not?
you could do that in the past, but you'd have had an argument from the shareholders that, hey, you're trying to do something that may not increase shareholder value. So
Right.
they would argue that you can't do some of these other things, and now at least we have some kind of legal protection to do it.
And it really has to do with a lot of, so the reason for that is the majority of the shareholders for these large companies are large institutions that have the same shareholders, because it's like a negative reinforcement. So it's like the bad guys have more shares, they're the ones going to push this continuously. If you're going to try to do something good, the institutional shareholders are going to try to move you back to doing bad to maximize their share, because this institutional fund needs to increase the value so that it has more investor in it. So that's a trickle, kind of the interwines of Wall Street that is affecting the revenue.
And that's the real benefit of a public benefit corporation or certified B companies. Prior to putting these kind of statements into your articles, your bylaws, your governance documents, the board of directors was always at risk of being sued by the shareholders if they don't maximize shareholder value.
Right.
And so we've created this Frankenstein monster out there of creating, maximizing shareholder value at all costs and not looking at what the impact of people and planet is. So I am a firm believer that regenerative capitalism, what these guys are doing, what we're trying to do through community investment is the way out. Because capitalism for good can be pretty awesome, but we have to create the new systems to do it.
So thank you guys very much. We have to create the new system.
Yeah, thank you, Tom, Craig, and Hanan, for your time, your expertise,